or Rosh Chodesh Shevat. It's Rosh Hashanah Le'ilam Kid Divrei Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai holds already Rosh Hashanah Le'ilam today. The storm are Medayik. Kid there doesn't say Divrei Beis Shammai, but Kid Divrei Beis Shammai Kayadua, that it's not either or. If you like Beis Shammai, you're Mechadedi Tfei. They were sharper. So you could already feel the hischachus that Tu B'Shvat brings on Rosh Chodesh Shvat. That's what it says in his form, which will try to explain what is the transition that happens, in Chodesh Shvat in general, and Tu B'Shvat in particular. Also, it's an interesting thing that where is Chodesh Shvat mentioned in the Chumash? Huh? Yeah.
Where is Shevat mentioned in
Chumash?
Shvatim?
Yeah. I meant the month. Where we had Ho Moshe Beres HaTorah Zos. Moshe began saying Mishnah Torah and Rosh Chodesh Shvat. This was his last, shir from Rosh Chodesh Shvat to Zayin Adar. That's of course, and it's very interesting that he said Mishnah Torah in Chodesh Shvat. We learned Mishnah Torah in Chodesh Av, right? And we notice, that these months are parallel in a way that we'll try to explain briefly, and that's where you have Tu B'Shvat and Tu B'Av, right? So, a connection there, and we also have to can't overlook, the union of Shovavim, that is, mainly in the month of Shvat. Shvat is Kulo, a month that belongs to this kufa called Shovavim, where we try to be metaking Tikkun Abris, Kayadua, and we'll discuss that also, and all in just 15 minutes, right? Right. Sefer Yetzirah says in Perek Hey, Mishnah Tes, right? If you want to do Was Torah, you go to Greystone. Here we do the real stuff, okay? Right. So, sorry, it's Mishnah Yud. Perek Hey, Mishnah Yud, right? Regarding the month of Shvat. Himlich Os Tzadi B'Le'ita, right? What rains in the month of Shvat is the Os Tzadi. B'Le'ita, what's Le'ita? Haliteni Namanam, like the mamash pour it down without chewing. Esav asked Halitenina. And the Mishnah says that the Gemalim only they were Mal'itim lahem. They just they could just when their mouth is up, just pour it down. It goes without chewing. Just take in mamash without even chewing first. So that's Os Tzadi B'Le'ita. V'koshalo keser, v'tzarfam zeb, zevetzam dli bomen, and in the zodiac there's the thing called dli. It looks like a bucket. What do you call that thing in there? Is that what it is? Yeah, dli. Right, and korkavan benefesh in the digestive tract is what it's parallel to that in the human being. Right, it's kind of olam shana nefesh. So in the nefesh it's korkavan, right? In the and in the olam it's dli, that mazel, the bucket. Right, and in the Zman it's Chodesh Shvat, which is the letter Tzadi B'Le'ita. So for those who are mechaven the Tziruf Shemus, there's 12 ways to rearrange the Shem Havaya, right? Since it should have been 16, but two of the letters are the same. Okay, so there are 12 Tzirufim. So the Tziruf for this month is Hey Yud Vav Hey. Right? So the first half is backwards, but the second half is Vav Hey, is normal. Right? And it's Yotzim ben Apasuk Hamer Yamireno V'Hayahu. That if a person does a Tmura, you're not supposed to do a Tmura. Try to if you magdish something for a carbon, to try to take off the Kedusha and move it on to a different animal, you're not supposed to do that. But if you do that, V'Hayahu Usmuraso Yekodesh. Double jeopardy. Now you're not going to get the kedusha off the first one. It's going to be mekadosh the second one, and that's it. Hamer yamireno v'hayahu, right? So what's a kesher? How do we, make order out of all these things? And Agav, if in case I forget to mention, in Chodesh Av, it's exactly the opposite. The tziruf of Chodesh Av is, Hey Vav, Yud Hey. That you have the Vav Hey at the beginning and inverted, but the Yud and Hey is Keseder. And it's Yotzei from the Pasuk, Haskes Ushma Yisrael Hayom. Right? But, Adam B'didan, right, to understand what's going on, the transition that there is in Chodesh Shvat. Right? That the Gemara says that by Tu B'Shvat Yatsu Rov Gishmei Shana, right? The rain has mainly come in to the world, and Asraf Ole Ba'ilanos, and the sap starts to rise. Right? The Davar Nifla, just in the Metzias, and it fits so much with what's going on politically, right? Shem Yerachem, as I'll explain. Right? On Rosh Hashanah we got a new din. Right, and we knew we got, Mizosov Adam Ksuvim, and the Rebbe Shalom determined how much Shefa is going to come down. Now, that Shefa comes into the world together with the Kshomim. And that's why Chazal talk about Godel Yom Kshomim, Afil Pruta Shebekis Misparechas. You should know that the Geshem is just a Levush Gashmi to the idea of the Shefa pouring down, right? But that shefa still needs to be processed, right? Like the rainwater, it's got to go in and out. So what are we living off? Between Rosh Hashanah, right, and Tu B'Shvat, when Hasraf Oleh B'Nos, and that's where the transition begins. Think about it. The bracha of Tafshin Pei Aleph, you're only going to start feeling it from Tu B'Shvat and onwards. So that's when Asraf goes and start being Motzi Peros, and just like it's going to be that way agriculturally, we're living off the leftovers of last year. The Trump presidency that we had it's just leftovers from last year. Rahman al-Tzlan, and Rosh Hashanah was Nigzar, Vayakam Melech Chadash, right? Senile and all, right? Right? No, but it works out unbelievable. That, Trump's presidency expired in Shvat, right? What we had, what we had from him until now was just the leftovers of last year. Just like, all the fruits and vegetables, whatever you're eating, there's all the leftovers from last year, right? And so here's the transition, right, that happens in Chodesh Shvat, is that, the Shefa starts getting processed, right? So now there's a very important point to make over here, that there's how the Shefa came through the Kshomim, right? And of course, too little Geshem is that's not bracha. But there's Gishmei bracha. But what happens when it rains too much? What Choni Amago said? So Sufil bracha. Well, right, it's too much. Why too much bracha? Right? So it means Geshem is never really bad. So an amazing Lashon Chazal, that by the Dor HaMabul, Mamash swamped, right? There's Lashon that Hitimam Me'ein Olam Haba, right? That all that Geshem that came out in Mamash Bosham, flooded them with Me'ein, Me'ein the absolute Teva, right? And that's the side, everyone knows, Moshe Menatar Minayin. Where's the remnants to Moshe Rabbeinu before he lived, right? Moshe Menatar Minayin, the Gemara and Chul and Kufla Mites, right? And that Lo Yadun Ruchi Ba'odam La'olam B'Shagam Hu Ba'Sarir of Me'avasim Shana. The Gzeira of the Mabul is a remiss to Moshe, right? B'Shagam Gematria Moshe. I'm not going to deal with man forever. It's for he is flesh. B'Shagam, for he is B'Shagam Ubas B'Shagam Gematria Moshe. We have a that in the Pasuk Pshat it means that the Rebbe goes at 120 years later. The Mabul will come, and that's when Noach began construction on the Teva, right? But it's also a remnant. Moshe Rabbeinu lived 120 years, right? The remnant to Moshe is by the Dor Mabul, right? By the Gzeira of the Mabul, because Kayadua Mayim Chaim is Torah, right? But here's the thing, we know Zocha Nasel Samachayim, Lo Zocha Nasel Samamoves, right? There's such a thing that if you don't have Kalim to be Makabel the Teva, it could be Tov, right? But because you don't have kalim to process it, for you it's bad, because you don't have the ability to be makabel, right, to process it. Right, the Rebbe wanted to give Torah already. He gave 10 generations from Brias Olam until then, And that's the Indian that Moshe Rabbeinu rumors. They wanted to give Torah. They weren't roy. So that all the Mei Hamabul, right, is beside like the Mayim Rabim, Lo Yechlu Lechabel Sa'ava, right? It's Marsh Muramis on the Koch of Torah, and because they didn't have Kalim to be Makabel it vanquished them. Harry, we have Me'ain this La'asid Lovo. The Gemara says in the Dorim, I'm going to Florida. Asid HaKadosh Lo Tzikama Min Artika, right? And then tzadikim misrapim bo shneim Hashem shtako marpe v'rashoyim nidonim bo. Also lavo, the Rebbeinu going to take the sun out of the sheath, right? And the tzadikim get a great tan, right? And it's mamash, it's the best spot. Tzadikim misrapim bo, but the rishoyim nidonim bo, and it's the same light at the same beach at the same time, right? Because it's tova, Harry, it's tova. Right, but since the Rishonim don't have the ability to be makabel, so it vaporizes them, right? And with this, the Ramchal Agav, the Ramchal uses this to explain Harei Kol Ma'adav Mishmael Latav. Right, Rebbe Shalom has no shinui ratzon because he's perfect, so he thought of everything. So how could he ever change his mind? So he only wants to be meitiv. So where did the dinim come from? So Ramchal writes this in his kuntras called Derech Eitz Chaim, that's sometimes printed in the back of Mesilas Yesharim. And he says, listen, it gives basically the same idea. The world, goes round and round and round. It says that's what we call, we say Mina Shamayim, Yira Shamayim. Why Shamayim? Because the earth just does its thing, goes around and round around the sun, right? Sometimes it's hot, sometimes it's cold. It's the earth being schizophrenic. No, it's just doing its thing, right? The Shinu is in the Makablin. Right? It's not the Shinu, it's not in the sun, it's not in the earth, they're just doing its thing, right? I always give a mashal when I teach this, you have an oven, right? Crank it up high, right? And put in three things, right? You put one of them Betty Crocker, Duncan Hines cake batters, right? Right? You tell everyone you baked it from scratch, right? You put that one in, right? And you put it in an ice cube, and you put in a piece of paper, right? So the ice cube melts, but that cake batter gets hard, right? And the paper catches fire. Schizophrenic oven. Does it ignite things? Does it melt things? It doesn't harden things. And it's just doing its thing. It's just doing its thing, just giving off heat. The Shinu is in the Makablim. Says the Ramchal, Rebbe is just doing his thing, like the Shamayim, that's just going in circles, circular orbits, just doing its thing. Just for the tzaddikim, the energy of being meitiv is good for them. They have kalim to be makabel. For the Rishoyim, who are Rishoyim by their own fault, they don't have kalim to be makabel, the hatava. So the hatava vaporizes them because of how they position themselves. Right? So like that's the big challenge. Rebbe was now bringing in with the Geshem, he's bringing in Shefa, right? But you have to be like the Talmud Hagun, like the Zocha Naso Samachayim, right? Right? You have to be able to process that goodness, have kalim to process that goodness. Until Shevat, we didn't have these kalim, but we also didn't need them because the Shefa was still in the process of coming in, right? But now from Shvat, Rosh Hashanah le'ilon. So my Rebbe, Moshe Shapiro, Zecher Tzaddik V'Kar Shavracha, told us in Shir, nothing that we call an elon, is an eitz. There's also, there's something called eitzah, advice. What does one have to do with the other? No, it's the same word. Lo Sasha says eitzah. You can read that, don't cut its trees by, what do you do, a matzor, you do a siege on a city. And also, but eitzah, same word, advice, eitzah. Well, anyway, wasn't me. Huh. What's the kesher? So he told us like this, right? That, a tree is the most efficient machine that there is, right? It takes water from the earth and nutrients from the earth, and it takes some stuff from the air, and it makes fruit. And what's the waste product? Sachakol, a little bit of oxygen, to improve the environment. Right? It's unbelievable, efficient machine. That now, if you you go to the laboratory and you take some dirt and you take some water and you take some air and you try to make fruit out of it. Go ahead, try. Right? You just make a mess. Right? Right? The eights, puts things in a mahalach of how the resources combine in a very efficient way with virtually the waste product is oxygen, right? Halavayalenu, right? Remember once heard a lecture from a professor who teaches on arachim. He was a biochemist by trade. And it says, that... yeah, it could be, yeah. And it was once I was on an arachim program. And first of all, it was very clear from what I learned from him that if Darwin would want to sell the theory of evolution today, let's say it didn't catch on bismano, no one would listen. Because it caught on bismano because we didn't understand the godless, the complexity of the Bria and biochemistry. He was lucky that he sold his theory when we were pretty ignorant of how nifla everything is. And then it just became mushrosh. It became the narrative. Like Trump is a racist. It just became the narrative. Right? Let's see. Right? If you say otherwise, we'll cancel you. Right? So that's... Right. Right, it just became the narrative. Right? But if he would try to sell it today, everyone would laugh at him. You know how unbelievably complex the Bria is. Can't happen by chance. So he said that the amount of photosynthesis that goes on in a leaf to make the simple sugars, to do that in Mifratz Haifa, that's what have a huge industrial zone. Right, to do it in Mifratz, you'd have to have 10 buildings with a lot of raw material, and there'll be a lot of toxic waste to make that much sugar artificially than what a little leaf does. Nifla mode, right? Right. So he says that's what an eitzah is. When you go to a Baal eitzah, right, a real one, not the one just a consultant that just the only thing is to charge you for the time, right? No, I'm saying you go to someone, a real emes of Baal eitzah, right? So Lamasa, you know the hard facts better than he does. So what's he doing for you? He's giving you a mahalach of how to process, because you're a mebulbal, right? You're losing control over all the factors, right? You can't harness, and he gives you a derech, right? A derech of how to make seder out of all the issues and align them in a way that comes into a productive outcome. So the eitzes, that's eitzah, that's the eitz, right? And that's the kalim that we're zocher to get in Tu B'Shvat. It's Rosh Hashanah le'ilon, right? The tree is what processes all that water, all that gishmei bracha into a productive mahalach, right? That's we get those kalim in Shvat, just as all the shefa has entered the world. Right? And that's to make seder out of all the water, right? That all that shefa should be processed in a way that, because if you don't know how to process it, it'll swamp you, it'll ruin you, it'll be your undoing if you don't have kalim to process it, right? So so that's of a deli, a bucket, right? It's a way to harness the water. Try to pick up the water in your hands, it'll fall between your fingertips, right? You have to be able to, harness the water in a way that you could keep control over it, right? That's what a dli is. That's the mazel dli, right? So now, be'emesin, sometimes we have an appetite for more than we can chew. That's the statement. Saying, bit off more than you can chew, right? And that's what le'ita is. Right? So Beis Yaakov from Ishbitza explains that sometimes the Rebbe Shalom did give us an unhealthy appetite that we want more than what we could process. Go to any kiddush, right? That's it. You're taking in more than you can process, right? And you still eat lunch after that. It's unbelievable, right? It's the healthy Jewish appetite, right? But it's min hashamayim that way, because sometimes Rebbe Shalom wants you to go a little bit overboard, but besofo shel davar, right, you will process it. And that's what has to do with tamura. You shouldn't, you should not do a tamura. But if you do a tamura, then vayahu tamuraso. You're not going to accomplish your goal of taking the kedusha off the other animal. You're going to end up with more. Now you have 2 korbanos. You wanted only one. Just move on. Now you end up with 2 korbanos. So the Rebbe Shalom is misader sometimes, mina shamayim, that we could bite off more than we could chew, for the sake of that ultimately it gets harnessed. That's os tzadi, the tzadik, b'le'ita. Tzadik ochel lesova nafsho. So even though it's le'ita, your mom is taking in without chewing first, like mamash, more than you can chew. more than you can chew, but it's both tzadi that in the end, it gets processed. Right? The Rebbe wants us to bite off a little more than we can chew, but for a good way, in a good sense of increasing kedusha in the world. Right? So, the healthy appetite, but for tzaddik, for tzidkus, right? To bring more.
You never know you can handle until you do more than you can handle, right?
Yeah. So that's what he says. The first half of the month, right? If you divide the 4 oisius of the Shem, connected the 4 weeks of the month, so the first half of the month before Tu B'Shvat, right? So it's Hey Yud, it's Hafuch, right? The Seder it's not Keseder. That's a person who eats more than he could chew, right? It means Le'ita is that you're swallowing before you're chewing, right? So you're Mahapach the Seder. So that's putting like the Hey before the Yud. But the second half of the month, which is from Tu B'Shvat and onwards, Vav, Hey, that everything goes Keseder, it works out in the end. It gets processed. Right? It gets processed. Right? Right, and so that's so the first half. So Beis Shammai feels what's coming. They already could feel the Vav Hey from the beginning of the month. Beis Hillel says the fee, when it comes, it comes. When it comes for the Roiv, that's when it comes, and that's from Tu B'Shvat onwards. Rosh Hashanah Le'ilon, the ability to process all that bracha, to harness it correctly. Right. So now so now that's the end of Sefer Dvarim. Sefer Dvarim also. Hoyo Moshe be'eres hatorazos. So it's many pshatim. The simplest pshat, like the Rambam writes, is Akdam Rezoim, and no sveikus. Any question you have 6 weeks between now and when I leave to ask me anything you need to know. Right? So he was mavar all the sveikus, right? But the lashon Rashi is that he was mavar Torah b'shivim lashon, right? That he already gave a hachana for the golus that we're going to go into, and we're going to learn Torah in English, learn Torah in the Bali Tosis, learn Torah in French, and like Rashi once says, balaz, right? Right. The stomach, the Rashba and the Ramban, they gave Shir in Ladino, right? It was all right. It was all a hachana that to be able. Mishnah Torah was to be able to harness the Torah. That we have kalim for the Torah to seep into us so we could take it with us everywhere. Right? We should be able to take it with us everywhere throughout all the Galnios, right? To be able to harness, have an achiza in Torah. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to give us before he left. A way that, the Torah will get absorbed in us, right? That shouldn't just be that if we're on a certain level, we have kalim for Torah, but if we fall from that, we don't have kalim for Torah anymore. That was Luchos Rishonos. That's why they had to be broken. We didn't have kalim for them anymore. But Mishnah Torah was that the Torah, as it was after Luchos Rishonos, that should be always absorbed. Chaye olam nota b'sochenu. The chaye olam is nota, implanted, lashon netiya, right? Like an elon, right? Nota b'sochenu, and that's what Sefer Dvarim is all about, right? That was the Mishnah Torah, right? Like the Mishnah that gave us a permanent achiza on Torah. Right? So now in Chodesh Av, which is the reciprocal of, that's when we read Mishnah Torah. Moshe said it in Shevat. In Chodesh Av, we have something very similar. It's a terrible month, up to Tu B'Av. It's a horrible month, up to Tu B'Av, right? The dinim of Avel stop on Yud after Chatzos, but it's all big v'nafochu on Tu B'Av lo yom tom Yisrael, right? Be'etzem Chodesh Av. Right? Be'etzem Chodesh Av is Osid to be our greatest month. There's nothing I heard from Rabbi Moshe Shapiro, Zecher Tzaddik, V'Karsh Livracha. In Lashon HaKodesh, when you double the last letters, it means small. Like Katan is small, Katantan, very small. And he explained to us that's what we call Avodah Zarah Elil, little God. We're making fun of it. There's Kel, there's Elil, puny God. Right? So what's, according to that, what's Chodesh HaAviv? Nisan, our Chodesh is Aviv, little Av. Av was supposed to be our greatest month, right? So it was a month of Chorban because we fell in Madrega and we didn't have the Koach to Makabel, all that Shefa. So that's so the Ribui Shefa, destroyed us because we positioned ourselves in a matzav that we don't have Kalim to hold that Gevaldika Or of Chodesh Av and Las Love. It's going to be the happiest month. Make Nisan look Aviv, small Av, little by comparison. Right? We just didn't have the call. So the first half of Av right? So we have the Oisius Shalok, we have the last two Oisius, Haskesu Shma Hey Vav, which is the Avodah Sa'adam. The Rebbe was Machrib the Bais. He doesn't want our Avodah. That's the, right? But then, right, Yisrael Hayom, that we realize on Tu B'Av and onwards intellectually, Yud and Hey, and Keseda, we realize intellectually the Rebbe Shem Od Yodo Netuya Aleinu to redeem us, and that's what begins to bleed through on Tu B'Av, right? A little bit of the etzem dika goodness of Chodesh Av we start feeling, and we at least understand intellectually during the second half of the month that this is all going to change. It's going to be our greatest month. All right, so just to conclude, unless there's any points we left unaddressed, but the end of Shovavim, right, that we're in right now, that's a tikkun for what's levatola, right? And the mashal for that is mayim. Mayim is shapeless, formless. No tzura to it, right? Right. So when something is levatola, it doesn't connect to its target. It's not harnessed. It's not. It's unharnessed. What's unharnessed goes levatola, goes to waste. Right, and that's like waters that aren't harnessed, to power a mill or to, right, and so the Mabul was the Or HaTorah was unharnessed, right. Now Mitzrayim liked that; they made a living off that. They worshipped the Nilus and Kol Ben Hayora Tashlichu. Yitzias Mitzrayim ends with Kriyas Yamsuf, right. And Moshe was Ki Min Hamayim Mishisil. We have to get beyond the unharnessed water. Get beyond the unharnessed water that's just raging, unharnessed, unguided. No tzura. And when there's no tzura and there's no pattern, that's when things go livatala, right? The wasted resources, right? And that's the story. Moshe was in a teva as a child. Dora Mabul was really kept on going straight until Yetzias Mitzrayim. The later Doros weren't better than the Dora Mabul, right? Just Rebbe wanted to bring about Klal Yisrael already. Right, but the Mabul ended with Kriyas Yamsuf. That's when Rebbe split the waters, forced them into a tzura, right? And then after that, everything was changed from ever after. And then Vayuchlu Shloshes Yom V'lo Matzu Mayim. They needed Torah. Vayoreu Hashem Eitz. Right, so it's all murmurs. That the autumn is now an Eitz Asoda that's going to harness the Mayim of Torah. The Mayim was Morim before Vayor Hashem Eitz. They didn't have Kelim to harness the right. The process wasn't finalized. So if we harness the raging waters, right, by Kriyas Yamsuf, and we were goiver over the Mayim, that was a little bit of a minimum issue. But Am Yisrael still didn't have Kelim. V'loichul Yishtos Ki Morim Heim. Right? Still didn't have Kelim to Makabel the Mayim. Vayorei Hashem Eitz, and then Ki Adam Eitz Hasoda Eitz Chaimil Machazikim Bar Riborsus Machadish of that we're Eitz, we're an Eitz, right? And we have Kelim now to harness the war and make Paris, make Chidushei Torah, and make Tikkunim in the Olamas, right? And that's saying that also that's Kedushas Habris, that no resources go levatola, they're all harnessed towards Malchus Shemayim. L'chaim.